Her daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered, "She's just here to pose like a donor." Marilyn Hatcher heard it just like she'd heard every fake thank you and forced smile since the day Delia married into her family. She didn't flinch. She posed, smiled. And 20 minutes before Delia's name was to be announced on stage as the face of a new charity initiative, Marilyn revoked every cent that had funded it. Let them toast to a legacy that no longer existed. She'd built the name they wore like jewelry, and now she was taking it back. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. They thought she couldn't hear over the applause, but Marilyn Hatcher had spent a lifetime hearing the things people muttered when they thought she wasn't listening. The ballroom inside the Charleston Conservatory glowed with curated opulence. Gilded sconces bathed the paneled walls in warm light, and a soft quartet of violins drifted beneath the hum of conversation and silver trays clinked, perfumes mingled with catered figs and honey, and heels echoed over old money-polished floors. Marilyn stood beside the silent auction display, a silver clutch balanced in her gloved hand. Her name, the Marilyn Hatcher Trust, was printed in gold foil beneath every top-tier item. A rare Warhol sketch, a week at her Provençal estate, and a sapphire pin last seen at a Smithsonian gala. She didn't look at the crowd, she didn't need to. She knew where every smile was fake, where every compliment was a veiled transaction. Delia Hatcher leaned into Lucille Portman's shoulder. Her voice was low, warm, and unmistakably sharp. "She's just here to pose like a donor." Lucille blinked, caught between amusement and concern. "I'm sure she—" But Delia only smiled tighter, eyes trained on Marilyn like a hawk admiring a dying dove. Just feet away, Cal, the event photographer, paused mid-frame. He hadn't been trying to eavesdrop, but the words had sliced through the music like a knife through fruit, bitter and perfectly clear. He raised his lens not toward Delia, who now tilted her chin and laughed behind a flute of rosé, but toward Marilyn. Their eyes met. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She simply gave a faint, knowing smile, then turned back to the table as if repositioning a vase. On stage, Avery Hatcher stepped to the podium, his voice already amplified before the microphone adjusted. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and treasured patrons, thank you all for being here tonight. This gala, this mission, this impact, it wouldn't exist without your generosity." He let the crowd applaud. Delia clapped the loudest before continuing. "And tonight, we have the privilege of honoring a woman whose energy and excellence have guided our community forward. She is, in every way, the face of tomorrow's Charleston." Delia sat straighter, a perfect tableau of graceful expectation. From the back of the room, tucked discreetly behind an arrangement of magnolias and silver lanterns, Gretchen Ray watched with sharp eyes and sharper precision. She tapped a quiet message on her phone. Marilyn's did not vibrate, but she saw the screen light up and lifted it. "Gretchen, still want your full contribution posted before they announce?" Marilyn read it once, her lips pressed together. Then she typed back, nails clicking softly against the screen. "Marilyn, number pull every dollar." Across the ballroom, Gretchen's expression never changed, only her hands moved, clean and practiced, navigating the secure estate software. On the projection screen behind Avery, donor slides began cycling through. Colorful logos, smiling scholarship recipients, gold-tier donors. A spotlight flickered toward the stage, and somewhere near the auction, a champagne flute broke, no one noticed. Delia adjusted her posture, her glossy lipsticked smile ready to bloom. "And now," Avery said, "a fund that will open the door for over 400 local students to read, learn, and lead. Please join me in recognizing the launch of—" The screen behind him flickered, then blinked, then went black. Lucille turned her head sharply toward the AV booth. A slide briefly appeared, the Delia Hatcher Future Readers Initiative, before vanishing in a whirl of pixelation. A loading icon spiraled. Then another name flashed up in its place. Anonymous Donor, Bookbox Initiative. A small, unceremonious amount trailed beneath. Avery froze. Lucille leaned in, whispering frantically, "Where's the program slide? What happened to the fund?" Delia's face dropped for the first time that evening. In the sudden quiet, the room seemed to hold its breath. Avery cleared his throat, tapping the mic. "We appear to be experiencing a minor technical issue." But Delia knew. The blank screen told her everything. From the edge of the room, Cal lowered his camera. Delia stood instinctively, as if rising into an honor that now had no form. Her hand brushed the folds of her designer gown. She waited, but no music played. No name was called. And Marilyn Hatcher, silent as snowfall, picked up her clutch, nodded once at Gretchen across the room, and began walking toward the exit. One slow, graceful step after another. Her heels never rushed. Her shoulders never dropped. She moved like a woman closing a door she had built. The ballroom murmured, confused, unsettled. A few guests began whispering. A few more turned their heads. Gretchen glanced down at her screen, confirming the transfer was complete. And at the auction table now lit in soft spotlight, Cal raised his camera and captured Marilyn as she exited through the side hall, untouched by applause. They toasted with champagne. Delia beamed like royalty. Avery gripped her hand beneath the table. Lucille raised her glass with a too-wide smile. And beneath them all quietly, efficiently, Marilyn pulled the rug. In the back of the ballroom, Gretchen tapped once, then twice. Her iPad screen confirmed the cancellation with a pale blue checkmark. All pledged contributions from the Marilyn Hatcher Trust revoked. She didn't announce it. She didn't need to. The power of wealth, when wielded right, moved silently and left a noise no one could trace until it was far too late. At the front of the room, the donor slideshow shuddered. On screen, the Delia Hatcher Future Readers Initiative blinked once, then disappeared entirely. Where her name had stood in calligraphic serif font, now, nothing. No program, no initiative, no mention. Avery's brow furrowed as he leaned toward Lucille. "Where's the slide?" he whispered, tension disguised behind a politician's smile. "It was locked this morning." Lucille stiffened. "I had it loaded as final. That's impossible." Sloan sat 3 seats down, her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't speaking, but she was watching closely. She'd seen the exchange between Gretchen and her grandmother. She'd noticed the way Marilyn hadn't stayed to watch the honor unfold. Her fingers moved beneath the table, tapping out a quiet text. "Sloan, did something happen?" Backstage, Gretchen's phone buzzed. She peeked down. A single reply from Marilyn had already arrived. "Marilyn, correction in progress." Across the ballroom, Avery leaned forward, teeth clenched just behind his frozen smile. "Play the next one," he hissed to the tech assistant crouched by the projection screen. "We are," the man replied. "This is the next one." Instead of Delia's face, the display read Anonymous Donor Book Box Drive, a placeholder project, quietly funded years ago. The amount attached, less than 1/5 of what had been announced for Delia's honor. Delia's posture twitched, her mouth parted as if to correct the error herself, but no sound came out. The applause around her had thinned. Glasses remained in the air, unsure of whether to continue the toast or lower it out of confusion. For a woman who controlled her image like a stage director, the moment was pure chaos. In the corner, Cal lifted his camera, hesitated, then opened his photo gallery. There it was, the perfect shot of Delia, glowing under spotlight, mid-laugh with Lucille, practically dripping in entitlement. He looked at it once, then deleted it. The next frame, Marilyn, standing alone by the silent auction, her back straight, head tilted, eyes calm, with the faintest smirk the kind a storm gives before tearing down a coast. That photo, Cal saved, and backed up in 3 locations. He adjusted his lens again, capturing the quiet stammer happening at table 3, where Delia sat rigid as Avery whispered behind his hand. Lucille stood abruptly and stepped toward the AV booth. "Switch to the scholarship reel," she snapped. "Now." The lights dimmed slightly. A hush rippled through the guests as a generic video of students reading in classrooms filled the void that should have been Delia's crowning moment. Music played, but the atmosphere had fractured. Backstage, Gretchen closed her iPad and gave a small nod. Mission complete. Sloan read Marilyn's text, her mouth twitching upward for the first time that evening. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Delia leaned toward Avery, her voice hushed but desperate. "Why isn't my name on anything?" "I don't know," he muttered. "I don't just smile." Across the room, Marilyn was long gone. Her absence spoke louder than applause. Then Avery's phone buzzed. He checked it under the table and paled. Alert. Hatcher Family Foundation linked trust. Account activity. Balance, $0. His hand went rigid. Delia turned to him. What? He didn't answer, but the champagne in her glass trembled. They handed her the mic. The lights flickered, not dramatically, but just enough for the tension in the room to seize like a held breath. Delia Hatcher had rehearsed this moment for weeks. She'd chosen the deep emerald gown because it mirrored the gala's branding palette. Her hair was swept into a classic chignon. The matching clutch was selected to photograph well under both white flash and warm chandelier glow. She had even practiced holding the mic at the perfect height, confident but not boastful. Now she stood halfway to the stage, her name never called, her face arranged into a public smile that cracked by the second. The applause had died too quickly. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their faces caught in that socially brittle space between celebration and uncertainty. Behind the podium, the MC's brow wrinkled as Lucille Portman stepped up behind him, urgent and breathless. "Don't announce it," Lucille hissed into his ear. "We need to pause. Now." "But she's already," I said. Pause. Her voice cracked like porcelain. The mic squealed faintly before the MC cleared his throat and addressed the room, voice carefully upbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief intermission before our program announcement. We're making some final adjustments to tonight's donor recognitions to ensure accuracy and fairness across the board." Murmurs spilled like water through the ballroom. Delia stood frozen mid-step. Her manicured fingers clutched the satin of her dress, eyes scanning the projection screen still blank. No fund, no title, no smiling children in matching uniforms. Just a soft flicker of background loops, looping nothing at all. Avery shot to his feet and made a move toward Lucille, who quickly disappeared behind a curtain with the MC. He turned back toward Delia, lips pressed into a tight line, trying not to appear panicked. At their table, Sloan quietly pulled her chair back, her fingers lightly tapping against her phone. She didn't look at her parents. Her gaze flicked to the ballroom doors just in time to catch Marilyn. Poised, steady, elegant in her simplicity, Marilyn picked up her clutch from the back of the silent auction area. She didn't hurry, didn't gloat, didn't speak. Her heels echoed across the marble with a rhythm too measured to be accidental. Her departure sliced through the room louder than any announcement could have. Sloan followed her with her eyes until she was gone, not out the grand entrance, but through the side hallway reserved for staff and founders. By the wall, half hidden behind a column, Cal lowered his camera and exhaled. He had photographed this event 4 years in a row. He knew when to capture applause, when to spotlight pride, when to crop tension out of the frame. Tonight, he hadn't pressed the shutter once during Delia's walk. He opened his memory card gallery again, stared at Delia's last smirk-filled frame at the donor table, then, with a single swipe, deleted it. The next image was Marilyn, hands at her sides, eyes unreadable but devastating in their stillness. Cal tapped lock photo and set it aside. Backstage, Lucille gripped the curtains so hard the rings jangled on their rod. How the hell did the funding disappear? The tech assistant didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the administrative corridor, Gretchen leaned against the doorframe of the accounting office, phone in hand. She had been watching the projector feed from a hidden terminal linked directly to the donor system. The red line across Delia's name had not been a glitch. It was a removal. Her phone buzzed. A message from Marilyn had just appeared. "Thank you. I'm en route. Ready for next step?" Gretchen typed back. "You want to freeze their property maintenance fund next?" There was a pause. Then the reply. "Permanently." Gretchen looked up, lips curling in a way that wasn't quite a smile. Back in the ballroom, Delia had made her way back to her table, pretending to take it in stride, sipping at untouched champagne, though her hand trembled slightly. Avery checked his phone again, still no new alerts, only the one from earlier confirming the foundation's balance had been drained. The projector loop continued, but there was no Delia, no award, no honor. Just quiet between clinks of nervous cutlery and the realization that the evening had taken a turn none of them had scripted. They built their lives on a name they didn't earn, polished it, posed with it, and passed it off as something they created. But it had always been borrowed. And borrowed things, Marilyn knew, eventually get returned or revoked. At precisely 6:43 a.m., Gretchen Ray logged into the Hatcher Estate Living Trust's administrator dashboard and executed a full freeze on all open disbursement lines. Property maintenance, board allowances, discretionary travel funds locked. Her fingers moved with the kind of precision that didn't flinch. Every access point, Avery and Dileia once considered permanent, became dust in seconds. 3 minutes later, Avery's name flashed on Marilyn's phone screen. She watched it ring from the breakfast nook, calm as ever, her tea still steeping. The sun had just begun to cut across the marble counters of the kitchen. Outside, the magnolia leaves glistened from last night's storm. Inside, her phone buzzed like an insect she had no interest in swatting. She didn't answer. It rang again, then again. She silenced it, picked up her spoon, and stirred her tea quiet circles, clockwise. 3 turns, then stillness. Across town, Avery's face burned red. "She's lost her damn mind," he barked, pacing across their newly refinished kitchen. "I can't access the landscaping account. The house staff cards are declined. Our property tax draft bounced this morning." Delia leaned against the island, phone in hand, unaffected. Maybe she's just playing old woman games. Then her nails tapped rapidly across her phone. A few seconds later, she smirked. "There. Let's see if she likes it when the public sees how jealous people act at a certain age." The post went up within minutes. A photo of Delia from the gala, cropped tightly. Her smile bright, the caption said just enough to wound without names. "Sometimes women can't handle younger success. We pray for their healing. Number Grace under fire, number not my drama." By noon, the post had already been shared twice by mutuals in Charleston's donor circuit, with comments ranging from confused to skeptical. Sloan saw it in the back seat of her Uber, on the way to meet her grandmother for lunch. She hesitated before showing it, holding her phone sideways as Marilyn buttered a slice of cornbread at the table. "Did you see what she posted?" Marilyn didn't look at the screen. "Is it a photo or a performance?" "Both." Sloan turned the phone toward her. Marilyn scanned the caption once, then raised one eyebrow slightly. "Interesting punctuation," she said, then folded her napkin. Back at the trust office, Gretchen checked the final box to formalize one more update. Avery and Dileia Hatcher, successor trustee status, revoked. A notification email was generated instantly. She didn't bother sending a heads up. Lucille Portman called 2 hours later. Her voice was clipped, tight with diplomatic panic. "Marilyn, can we speak privately?" Marilyn glanced toward the long porch windows of her study. A breeze tugged at the drapes, the only movement she seemed to entertain anymore. "Privately," she said, "is where they made the mistake." A pause on the other end. Then Lucille cleared her throat. "I understand emotions are high, but—" "This isn't emotional," Marilyn cut in, polite but cold. "It's structural." Click. By that evening, Avery had gone from confusion to outrage. He stormed into the legal wing of their downtown office, demanding a sit-down with his attorney. "She's not well," he snapped. "She's 71, isolated, erratic. She's burning the foundation down out of spite." The lawyer, a nervous man named Carter Langston, blinked. "You're requesting?" "A petition," Avery barked, "for a mental capacity inquiry. She wants war? Let's go legal." Langston hesitated. "That could backfire if it's unfounded." "Do it," Avery snarled. "If she thinks she can just erase us, fine. Let's see how stable she looks under a microscope." They called her unstable, a relic unraveling. But when Marilyn Hatcher stepped into the Charleston County Courthouse that morning, she brought a storm behind her, and it was color-coded. The wheels of her leather briefcase clicked evenly across the marble as she passed through security. She wore slate gray, sharp at the collar, heels low but polished, and her expression unreadable. Beside her, Gretchen walked with a soft leather binder tucked under one arm and an iPad in the other, the kind of woman who never forgot what had been filed or who tried to challenge it. Courtroom 3B was half full. Avery sat on the left with his attorney, Carter Langston, his jaw flexing beneath an over-ironed collar. Delia, 2 seats down, wore a tightly cinched navy dress and oversized sunglasses, as if shielding herself from humiliation or accountability. Marilyn didn't acknowledge them. She took her seat on the opposite side, opened her case, and pulled out 5 navy blue binders, each labeled in embossed silver script: 1,987, 1,999, 2,000, 2009, 2010, 2015, 2016, 2020, and current assets. She aligned them perfectly on the table, one gloved hand smoothing the edges. The court clerk blinked. The court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Alden Pierce, was a former military man who didn't blink for drama. He adjusted his glasses and reviewed the intake summary. "Mrs. Hatcher, can you explain what you've brought with you?" Marilyn folded her hands over the top binder. "A complete ledger of every dollar I've earned, spent, reinvested, or donated since 1987. Indexed by year. Double-entry bookkeeping." Dr. Pierce arched an eyebrow. "You've logged every financial transaction for the past 37 years? With compound interest calculated monthly," she replied. "Color tabs for charitable versus personal expenditure." There was a silence that hummed with tension. Judge Donna Teague looked up from her docket, unimpressed but attentive. "Proceed." Gretchen stepped forward, placing a thumb drive on the table. "In addition to Mrs. Hatcher's personal records, we've submitted 10 years of CPA-certified audits, estate-level asset management documents, and verified communications that demonstrate Mrs. Hatcher has executed all trust decisions independently." Dr. Pierce cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hatcher, are you currently on any prescribed medication that affects cognition?" "Only calcium and dignity," she replied. "Though I can have my pharmacist fax a list if needed." Langston objected something vague about tone, but Judge Teague silenced him with a hand wave. The room settled into a quiet rhythm of review. Papers shuffled, tabs flipped. Gretchen handed over documents one by one, never rushed. Marilyn sat motionless, eyes steady, spine straight. A woman who had nothing to prove, only records to confirm. After 28 minutes of meticulous examination, Judge Teague closed the final folder. "Based on the documentation presented, and the court evaluator's findings," she said evenly, "there is no evidence of mental incapacity. This petition is not only unfounded, it borders on retaliatory misuse of the court's time." Avery's face blanched. "Further frivolous filings," the judge continued, "may result in sanctions or estate penalties. Do you understand, Mr. Hatcher?" He didn't speak at first, then nodded tightly. Marilyn stood with the grace of someone who had just won a chess game 5 moves ahead. She passed by Avery on her way out, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender of her perfume. She didn't stop, didn't slow, just gave him a smile that was sharper than any insult she could have voiced. "How's that for instability?" she murmured. Delia's mouth parted, but nothing came out. She reached for her phone instinctively, as if it might reverse what had just unfolded. Outside the courtroom, the sun had climbed high, burning through the lingering haze. Gretchen walked a few steps behind until Marilyn paused at the curb. "Well," Gretchen said, opening the car door for her. "That went efficiently." Marilyn slid into the back seat without hesitation. Gretchen followed. Once inside, she unlocked her tablet, already pulling up estate protocols. "Want to trigger the backup clause for full trust succession?" Marilyn didn't look up. "Let's begin." They posed in front of what she built magazine covers, gala walls, curated reels of polished perfection. But this time, Marilyn didn't just step out of the frame. She built a new one and left them off the invitation list entirely. The mahogany-paneled library inside the Charleston Women's Foundation was dressed in soft white linen and trimmed hydrangeas for the private luncheon. No velvet ropes, no spotlighted donor walls, just an intimate gathering of 20 women, leaders, builders, educators. And in the center of it all, Sloan Hatcher sat quietly beside her grandmother, fingers laced in her lap, a half-finished, sparkling cider sweating beside her untouched quiche. Marilyn had introduced her with a short speech. 5 sentences, no fanfare. "This is Sloan. She's thoughtful. She listens before she speaks, and when she does speak, she means it." The room had applauded. Sloan, unused to the spotlight, gave a nervous smile and lowered her eyes, but not before catching Gretchen's nod of approval across the room. After lunch, Cal invited by name. This time set up a photo by the library's hearth. No backdrops, no glamour lighting, just the warmth of worn wood and legacy. "Everyone ready?" he asked. Sloan, Marilyn, and 3 young women scholarship recipients and future teachers gathered close. Click. The camera caught something real. Youth and legacy. Mentorship and merit. No designer gowns, No curated angles, just presence. Across town, Avery poured himself another glass of bourbon, staring out over their too-still backyard. "We weren't even listed," he muttered, jaw tight. Delia was already refreshing the luncheon social post. No photos of her. No mention of Avery. Not even a generic, "The Hatcher family" caption, just, "Marilyn Hatcher and Youth Initiative leaders gather for private literacy event." "I built that name," Delia hissed under her breath. "And now she's erasing us from it." She opened her email. Nothing from Lucille. Nothing from the board. Not a single RSVP request. Her inbox, once overflowing with invitations, felt suddenly sterile. What she didn't know was that Marilyn had quietly donated $50,000 just hours before the luncheon. Not under her name. The funds had come from a secondary account with no personal identifiers. The only stipulation? That Sloan serve as youth liaison and project coordinator for the new literacy arm, a growing branch meant to fund underrepresented students across Charleston County. Gretchen, true to her surgical form, secured the naming rights by noon the next day. Press packets were sent to every local outlet. The S.J. Hatcher Next Chapter Fund, Sloan's initials. Marilyn hadn't asked for a headline, but she got one. And for the first time, it belonged to someone who hadn't begged for it. Delia scrolled through the article with a slow, sickening churn in her stomach. Her name wasn't there. Not in the donor roll, not in the side notes, not even in the alumni mentions from past galas. The photo showed Sloan standing in her place not by accident, but by selection. "Where is she?" Delia snapped. Avery glanced up. "Where is who?" "Lucille." But Lucille hadn't returned her last call. At precisely 4:12 p.m., Marilyn's phone buzzed. A single text, "Lucille. Delia is livid. Wants to sue for public defamation. Can we talk?" Marilyn stared at the message, her reflection faint in the screen's glare. She took a breath, folded the phone shut, and walked to the window. Outside, Sloan was helping load donated books into a teacher's car. Her sleeves rolled, her laugh light. She didn't reply. Not yet. She curated her image like a brand manager, always smiling 3 degrees past sincerity. Always centered in the photo. Always perfectly polished. But Marilyn had learned something far more powerful than public posing: how to document truth. And this time, truth came with receipts. The Charleston Charity Board met that Thursday afternoon in the Westmore Ruma high-ceilinged chamber with white-painted brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough polished oak to smell faintly of money and lemon oil. 12 members sat spaced along a U-shaped table. The end seat, reserved for senior emeritus, belonged to Marilyn. She took it with silent ease. Lucille was seated 2 chairs over, fidgeting with her pearl bracelet. She hadn't spoken to Delia since the text about defamation went unanswered. And now, the air between her and Marilyn was heavy with anticipation. Marilyn cleared her throat once. "Before we begin," she said, voice calm but cutting, "I'd like to address a growing confusion regarding individual contributions to our cause." Gretchen, seated just behind her with a black portfolio in hand, rose and approached the easel beside the table. She pulled off the cover, revealing a glossy printout of a donor bar graph, neatly labeled by year. The board leaned forward. "Each bar," Gretchen explained, tapping with a capped pen, "represents a total yearly donation per family unit over the last decade." Delia's name appeared. 10 years, 10 bars, none exceeding $200. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucille's lips parted, as if to mount a defense, but Marilyn was already unfolding the next item. A typed statement, signed and dated. She handed it directly to the board's secretary. "My position," Marilyn said, "is that public image should reflect private contribution. We are not in the business of building pedestals for ghosts." Cal, ever precise, had emailed her earlier that morning. Subject: Final Set Luncheon Gallery. Attached: "You, Sloan, youth reps. No, Delia. Not one shot. Thought you'd appreciate the edit." She had. Deeply. Now, she pulled a thin envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. Inside were 4, 5, x7 photographs, one of Sloan speaking with scholarship recipients, another of Marilyn with a young teacher, one wide shot of the luncheon table, mid-toe stand, finally, the portrait Cal had taken of Marilyn standing by the fireplace, hand resting lightly on Sloane's shoulder. There wasn't a trace of Delia in any frame. Lucille's voice was faint. "You've made your point." Marilyn didn't smile. "No," she said softly. "I've simply stopped making theirs." Gretchen returned to her seat as the room recalibrated. Marilyn glanced at no one. Her hands remained folded, motionless in her lap. The chandelier above flickered once in the afternoon sunlight. Behind the stillness, however, the current of fury was growing. That evening, as the board's statement quietly circulated, a diplomatic acknowledgement that public recognitions would now be tied to verified contributions, Avery sat at his kitchen island, staring at his inbox. He didn't bother reading the statement. Instead, he picked up his phone and called Langston. "She's cornering us," Avery snapped. "They're scrubbing us out in real time. What do we have left?" Langston's voice on the other end was strained. "You don't have legal recourse unless something changes." Avery paused. "Then let's change something." The next morning, Marilyn received a letter delivered by courier. On thick ivory stationery with Langston and Bell embossed at the top, it read, "This formal request seeks early estate access for the purposes of preserving financial stability for Mr. and Mrs. Hatcher, Jr." It was unsigned by hand. "Cowardice" came printed, Marilyn noted. She read it once, then handed it to Gretchen without comment. Gretchen raised a brow. "So now they're asking nicely?" Marilyn sipped her tea. "They've confused inheritance with entitlement." Her phone buzzed. A second text from Lucille. Delia saw the photos. "She's spiraling. May try to retaliate. Just a heads up." Marilyn didn't reply. She didn't need to, because Delia was already unraveling, and the next unravel would be public. They tried to collect on a living will-like impatient heirs hovering around a hospital bed. But Marilyn wasn't dying. She was documenting, and this time, she didn't change her will. She changed the locks. The letter arrived in a crisp cream envelope sealed with an actual wax insignia Langston's flair for the dramatic. Inside, a 5-paragraph demand written in the kind of sanitized legalese meant to sound benevolent. "We respectfully request a partial disbursement of the Hatcher estate on behalf of Avery and Dileia Hatcher for the purposes of maintaining future security and preserving Hatcher family holdings in the current financial climate." Future security. Marilyn read the phrase 3 times, then set the letter beside her teacup without a sound. "They treat it like an ATM," she said. Gretchen, seated across from her at the kitchen island, already had her laptop open. "They're framing it as stewardship. But there's a clause. You buried it years ago." Marilyn's eyes lifted. "Still valid?" "Live and sound," Gretchen confirmed. "No estate disbursement allowed while you're of sound mind and actively managing your finances." Marilyn gave a faint smile. "Good. Activate it." Gretchen's keys tapped. The clause lit up on the shared legal dashboard, the estate disbursement line now frozen with a red banner. Access restricted. Principal sound and active. But Marilyn didn't stop there. "Add a new restriction," she said. "Explicit. 0 early access. Not for health, housing, or high society." Gretchen looked up. "Fully locked?" Weld it shut. In the Hatcher house, Avery read the email update in stunned silence. Delia stood at the kitchen sink, arms folded, her phone vibrating nonstop on the counter. "She blocked it?" she asked without turning. Avery didn't answer. Delia exhaled, slow and venomous. "She thinks we're going to grovel." Then the wine glass in her hand shattered against the marble tile. Red streaked across the floor like blood in a crime scene. Sloan, standing quietly in the hallway, had seen the whole thing. Delia whirled. "Don't look at me like that." "I wasn't," Sloan said softly. "Go run back to your sainted grandmother then," Delia hissed, stepping over the glass barefoot like it didn't matter. Sloan backed away, hands clenched around her phone. A text blinked on her screen. "Marilyn. Lunch?" They sat in the garden patio of a small cafe on King Street, away from the places Delia haunted with her performative brunches. Sunlight filtered through ivy lattices above them. Sloan picked at her sandwich, silent. "She's angry," Marilyn said, sipping her lemonade. "But she's not hurt. Hurt people don't throw crystal. Entitled ones do." Sloan looked up. "Is this really happening?" Marilyn tilted her head. "What part? That you're locking them out, that you're finishing what they started?" Marilyn's tone was warm, but iron lay beneath it. You've watched them exploit the family name. I'm simply reclaiming it. Sloan set her fork down. But what about me? Marilyn didn't blink. Nothing you didn't earn will ever hold, Sloan. I won't hand you anything that turns to ash in your hands. Later that night, Gretchen finalized the trust amendment. Under successor designation, only one name remained. Sloan J. Hatcher, primary beneficiary and legal successor. Avery and Dileia were gone from every clause, permanently. Gretchen sent the signed paperwork to their attorneys without ceremony. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed with a flagged alert. She read it twice, then picked up her cell and dialed. "Marilyn," she said, "we have a new wrinkle." "What now?" Delia contacted a digital media rep. "She's threatening to go public." There was silence on the line. Then the sound of Marilyn standing from her chair. "Let her," she said. "But make sure she understands one thing." "What's that?" "She won't get a headline, just a footnote." She wanted headliness candle, vindication, a spotlight that might salvage what remained of her crumbling image. But Marilyn didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply handed her a footnote and walked away before the ink dried. It began with a subject line: "Truth behind the Hatcher, matriarch, you're gonna want this." The email was addressed to Low Country Leaks, a regional gossip blog known for laundering reputation wars through veiled, anonymous tips. Delia had attached a Word doc titled, "What Really Happened at the Gala," and "What They Don't Want You to Know," and offered high-res photos from years of adventure in center frame, Marilyn off to the side, Sloan half cropped out. The blogger, a man named Joel Pritchard who once sold ad space for tabloid spreads about Beaufort heiresses, was about to publish. But Joel had a problem. Someone else got to him first. Late that evening, Cal sent an email with no signature, no greeting, just an attached thread between Delia and the blog. Subject: "Tip you'll want to see before running that story." He didn't explain how he'd intercepted it. Marilyn read the forwarded chain over a cup of chamomile, the words dry and desperate on the screen. Delia had painted herself as the overlooked visionary, a generational threat to outdated power structures, and Marilyn's favorite, the true engine behind Charleston philanthropy. She handed the iPad to Gretchen. "Send a notice." Gretchen didn't blink. She'd already opened the draft folder. Within the hour, a letter was emailed, overnighted, and sent by legal courier. To Low Country Leaks. Be advised, any misrepresentation of a private citizen's estate, financial history, or fiduciary status will be met with full legal consequence under both civil and defamation law. All public records regarding donations, governance, and trust disbursement are available for court review. Consider this notice formal and binding. The next morning, Joel replied, "Not worth it. She's radioactive. We'll pass." That was all. No byline, no post, no story. Delia never got her headline. She threw her phone across the bedroom, shattering the screen against the hardwood floor. Avery appeared in the doorway, sleep-creased and silent. She said nothing. Delia seethed. Not one damn word. She just made me disappear. At the other end of Charleston, the Hatcher house was still. Sloan sat across from Marilyn in the sunroom, the light soft through gauze curtains. Outside, wind rustled through Spanish moss. "Why does she hate you so much?" Sloan asked, voice quiet. Marilyn stirred her tea slowly. "She needed a mirror," she said. "I refused to hold it." Sloan didn't speak, just watched her grandmother with something close to awe. Down the hall, Gretchen was filing papers into a neat blue folder. A newly issued non-litigation boundary ordera formal warning to Delia and her media contacts that future attempts to publicly weaponize the estate would be flagged as malicious interference. No courtroom, no headlines, just silence heavy and final. Later that week, a process server in a pressed gray suit rang the bell of Avery and Delia's home. Avery answered with a drink in hand. "Mr. Hatcher?" the man asked. Avery nodded, instinctively cautious. "You've been served." He handed over a stack of legal documents, nodded, and walked away. Avery flipped through the first few pages. The header made his throat tighten. Termination of residual beneficiary rights, effective immediately. Filed by Marilyn Eloise Hatcher, principal trustee of the Hatcher estate. Every clause had been rewritten, every fallback erased. No inheritance, no property access, No legal route back in. Avery sat down at the edge of the stairwell, the pages limp in his hands. Delia walked past, not even asking. He didn't stop her. She didn't stop to look. Because there was nothing left to claim. Only a name neither of them owned anymore. They built their world in her spotlight, performing philanthropy, posing in the soft glow of other people's legacies. But this time, Marilyn didn't dim the light. She turned it off. The second annual Charleston Literacy Gala returned in late spring and evening, humming with old money, fresh ambition, and scented with gardenias hung like chandeliers above each table. Guests sipped lavender cocktails under a tent lined with fairy lights, the same tent Avery and Dileia had once ruled with curated charm. Only this year their names weren't on the invite list, or the donor wall, or the program. Because the event had been funded in full quietly, strategically, and with absolute control by an anonymous donor from the S.J. Hatcher Next Chapter Fund. Sloan stood near the stage in a navy jumpsuit, a lanyard around her neck that read Youth Innovator Vertical Bar Literacy Access Liaison. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but she was noticed. When she introduced the keynote speaker, her voice was calm, her posture grounded. There was no trace of Delia's theatrical flourishes, just steady, quiet power. Backstage, Marilyn watched through the side curtain. She didn't need a seat at the center table to be heard. The name on the fund did that for her. The MC's voice boomed. We are proud to recognize the extraordinary work being led by our youth partners, including tonight's featured honoree, Sloan Hatcher. The applause was thunderous. Avery and Dileia were nowhere near the building. They hadn't been invited. And though Avery had tried twice to clarify the oversight through Lucille, he received only one-word replies. Dileia had stopped pretending to care. She spent that night in bed, scrolling through tagged posts she wasn't in, reading captions that no longer mentioned her last name. In the coat room near the service hallway, Cal found a note slipped into his camera bag. It was written on ivory stationery in Marilyn's unmistakable script. Sometimes the lens catches more than light. Thank you for what you didn't take. He smiled, then lifted his camera and took the only photo he'd capture that night, Sloan in profile, standing with a group of third graders holding up their first ever library cards. Back near the gala entrance, Lucille found Marilyn by the garden exit, her shawl wrapped lightly over her shoulders. I owe you an apology, Lucille said, her voice nearly lost beneath the evening breeze. Marilyn turned. For what? Lucille hesitated. For listening to her. For letting Flash blind me. Marilyn gave the faintest nod. Vanity's loud. Substance waits its turn. Lucille bit her lip. You won. Completely. Marilyn's eyes drifted over the tent, the laughter, the books being handed to guests as parting gifts instead of favors. This was never about winning, she said. We don't reclaim space, Lucille. We rebuild it. Lucille didn't have a response. She stepped back as Marilyn slipped out the garden gate and into the night, leaving behind only her legacy. At the end of the event, Sloan helped the event staff clear table cards and box leftover pastry. One of the teen volunteers handed her a flower arrangement and said, Your grandma, she really changed this place. Sloan smiled. She didn't change it. She replaced it. Meanwhile, in her home study, Gretchen placed the final estate folder on the desk. Every document signed, every clause reinforced. She called Marilyn, who answered on the second ring. It's done, Gretchen said. Everything's airtight. Marilyn closed her book. Are you ready? Gretchen asked. For the final shift. They tried to borrow legacy wrapped themselves in its silk, performed under its banner, signed their names like ink alone made them permanent. But Marilyn didn't borrow. She built. And on a quiet Tuesday morning, she carved it in stone. The final trust document sat before her on parchment-thick legal paper, embossed at the top with the seal of the Charleston Estate Registry. The signature line gleamed beneath the sunlight filtering through the east windows of her study. Gretchen stood across the desk, still and poised, holding a second copy for the vault. All assets now directed to the Hatcher Women's Fund, she said. You understand this is irrevocable? Marilyn dipped the pen. That's the point, she murmured. Her signature, smooth and fluid, landed like a closing door. Gretchen filed the copies, her movements efficient, practiced. Avery and Dileia are removed from every clause, every fallback and contingence clause rerouted to Sloan and the fund. Marilyn nodded once, then reached for her tea, the faint scent of orange blossom rising from the cup. In the background, the printer hummed. The confirmation page slid out, marking the legal shift of every account, property, and endowment. It was done. 3 days later, Sloan arrived with a thin envelope in her backpack. She found her grandmother trimming the rose bushes on the back porch, sleeves rolled, wide-brimmed hat shielding her from the Charleston sun. "I got something," Sloan said, holding out the letter with a strange sort of shyness. Marilyn slipped off her gloves, took the envelope, and opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note on lined paper, 3 different handwritings, signed at the bottom in blue ink. "Dear Sloan, thank you for showing up. Not just for the class, but for us. You didn't make us feel small. Nia, Taylor, and Camille." There were no logos, no hashtag, just gratitude in ink. Marilyn blinked once, then again, and handed the letter back to her granddaughter with both hands. "This," she said, voice quiet, "is the only currency that holds." Sloan smiled. "They're the girls from the East Side tutoring group. I didn't think they'd—" Marilyn cut her off with a gentle wave. She rose, stepped inside, and returned moments later with a mahogany frame. Without a word, she opened the backing and slid the letter into place. She placed it on the mantel, directly beside a photo of her late husband, not out of sentiment, but contrast. Gretchen arrived shortly after, a slim folder in hand. "All done," she said. "Your estate is now structured under the fund. You'll remain chair until the board votes to elect Sloan as executive director." "They will," Marilyn replied. "They just don't know it yet." Gretchen smiled faintly. "You've outlived the takers." Marilyn stared at the mantel, eyes fixed on the note. "They never lived," she said. "They performed." The air in the room settled around that truth. Outside, cicadas buzzed, low and steady. A breeze shifted the shears. Then Marilyn's phone lit up on the side table with a new message. "Charleston Museum Archives. Miss Hatcher. We're preparing a permanent collection on Southern women in philanthropy. Would you consider donating your personal papers and legacy ledgers?" Marilyn tapped the screen once. The message expanded. "We believe your documentation tells a story few have seen and fewer have dared to write." She stared at it, expression unreadable, then reached for her glasses and read it again, slower this time. The porch clock ticked once. A decision hovered. They wore pearl-sklicking down marble halls, smiling for photographs, passing hors d'oeuvres like power lived in canapés and manicured hands. But Marilyn didn't come for the pageantry. She came with 40 years of proof. The Charleston Historical Society's archive wing was housed in an old brick courthouse, the kind with oil paintings of unsmiling men in gilded frames and floors that creaked with secrets. The air smelled of leather bindings, cedar drawers, and a faint trace of lemon oil. It was the kind of room that respected silence and documentation. Marilyn entered with a black archival box tucked beneath her arm and Sloan at her side. No entourage, no announcement, just presence. The archivist, a lean woman named Dr. Evelyn Marks, met them with white gloves already on. She gestured to the center table beneath a cone of museum lighting. "Miss Hatcher, we're honored. Your office said the collection was personal?" Marilyn set the box down with both hands, slow and deliberate. Every transaction, every contract, every handwritten ledger from 1981 forward. Evelyn peeled back the lid and blinked. Inside, neat ledgers, bound in leather and linen, some with tabs hand-stitched, others bearing faded pencil notations in the margins. Dates were labeled in gold embossing. Nothing frayed, nothing forgotten. She reached for one labeled 1987, 1993, opened the cover, and drew a breath. "This," Evelyn said, turning a page delicately, "is the backbone of Southern philanthropy." "No," Marilyn corrected gently. "It's the proof of it. The backbone was always the women. They just let the men sign the checks." Sloan watched quietly, her fingers woven around the strap of her bag. She hadn't spoken since they left the house, but now she stepped forward and looked down at the Pagisher grandmother's looping script in faded ink, each digit placed with precision. "How long did it take you to do all this?" she asked. Marilyn smiled faintly. "My whole life." The archivist looked between them, then closed the ledger with reverence. "We'll digitize, scan, and preserve. And if you'll allow it, we'd like to build a permanent exhibit The Hatcher women, quiet architects of change. Marilyn raised an eyebrow. I thought you said it was the backbone. It was, Evelyn said. But now it can have a voice. Outside, the press release hit at 1:03 p.m. The museum's social accounts posted an announcement. Philanthropic icon Marilyn Hatcher donates 40-year ledger archive to Charleston History Trust. There were photos Marilyn in profile beside Sloan, the archival box between them, quotes from the museum, mentions of the fund, none of Dileia, not even in the footnotes. Dileia saw the headline while checking Instagram at a nail salon, mid-manicure. She locked her phone so fast she smudged the polish. Avery, reading it from a silent retreat in Savannah, said nothing. He simply flipped the newspaper and read the sports scores. Back in the archive room, Sloan leaned over the table, eyes following a signature looped in 1994. You made yourself unforgettable, she said softly. Marilyn didn't answer right away. Her hand hovered over the final binder. No, she said at last. I just made sure they couldn't rewrite me. Later that night, after Sloan had gone upstairs and Gretchen had finalized the trust's quarterly summary, Marilyn returned to her writing desk. She pulled out a cream envelope with an old wax seal, cracked but intact. The paper inside was blank. She uncapped a pen. To be opened when I am gone. She stared at the words for a long moment, the silence thick enough to hold them. Then, slowly, she began to write. She left them out cleanly, deliberately, like pruning rot from a rosebush. But she didn't leave empty spaces. She filled them with something better. Sloan sat cross-legged on the floor of her grandmother's study, the afternoon light casting long stripes through the blinds. The envelope was heavier than it looked, sealed in wax and marked in her grandmother's unmistakable handwriting. To be opened when I am gone. But Marilyn hadn't waited to die to be heard. She had handed it to Sloan directly that morning, with no speech, no ceremony, just a glance that said, it's time. Now, alone and steady, Sloan peeled open the flap. The letter began simply, You asked once why she hated me. This is why. Not because I embarrassed her, not because I defied her, but because I outlasted her. The next paragraphs traced the quiet map of a life Sloan had only ever seen in fragments, a marriage of appearances, a husband's debts erased behind closed doors, friendships lost for choosing honesty over comfort, and the relentless maintenance of a legacy deliberately mistaken for vanity. I was not the first woman to be erased with a smile, but I may be one of the last to erase them back. You inherit the truth, Sloan. You inherit the work. Don't let either be softened. At the bottom of the final page, the ink had pressed harder into the paper. I left them nothing, but I left you everything. Make it unerasable. Sloan folded the letter with trembling hands, not from sadness, but gravity. She looked around the study, its walls lined with books, ledgers, framed thank you notes, and one photograph, her and Marilyn, arms linked on the porch. Downstairs, Gretchen sat in the sunroom, laptop open. She didn't look up as Sloan entered. It's official, she said, tapping her screen. Legacy Trust now routes 100% to Sloan J. Hatcher and the Women's Fund. Avery and Dileia's names have been scrubbed. Scrubbed? Sloan echoed. Like they were never in the ledger at all. Outside, a mockingbird landed on the railing, trilling without pause. Sloan listened for a moment before speaking. She did all this while everyone else assumed she was just old. She was never just anything, Gretchen replied. That night, Avery called. Marilyn's phone lit up on the nightstand, the name still saved in her contacts. Avery. Home. She didn't pick up. She watched it ring until it stopped, the screen dimming like a curtain falling. There would be no callbacks. The next morning, Dileia filed a civil claim with the Charleston County Probate Court, citing unlawful removal from estate provisions, psychological coercion, and fiduciary misconduct. The claim was dismissed in 3 days. No legal standing, the court ruled. No moral leg to stand on either. Dileia never showed up to the hearing. Neither did Marilyn. 1 week later, invitations went out to a new kind of event, printed on thick cardstock, cream and slate gray, with a copper-embossed title, Founders Retreat, for young women only. A private summit on legacy, stewardship, and unapologetic leadership. No husbands, no bored husbands, no socialite wine moms hoping for photo ops. Just the next generation and the tools Marilyn had built to arm them. At the bottom of the invitation, presented by the S.J. Hatcher Women's Fund, executive host, Sloan J. Hatcher. When Lucille opened hers, she smiled. When Delia found out she hadn't been sent one, she shattered her third wine glass in a week. And Marilyn? She sat on her porch, the breeze lifting the hem of her linen sleeve, a fresh cup of tea in her hand, and her photo album closed beside her. Not out of nostalgia but punctuation. Everything that needed saying had been said. Everything that needed keeping had been kept. And for once, no one was coming to take it. They mocked her for posing, called it performative, petty, a last attempt at relevance. But the image they sneered at now hung in the front hall of a building they'd never be invited into. The Women's Legacy HQ in Charleston stood just 2 blocks from the waterfront, carved from the shell of an old sugar warehouse and transformed with warm brick, soft lighting, and reclaimed wood floors that creaked with purpose. At the end of the main corridor, near the donor wall, hung a single framed photograph. It wasn't large, but it demanded stillness. The photo showed Marilyn Hatcher standing alone by the silent auction table from that fateful gala. Her posture was graceful, unbothered. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of a tablecloth. Her eyes, though soft, were unflinching. The crowd behind her blurred like noise she'd already learned to ignore. Beneath the frame, engraved on a bronze plaque, "True donors don't need to be seen, just felt." Guests stopped to read it. Interns whispered about it. New donors took selfies beside it, not to outshine it, but to be near it. Down the hall, inside the boardroom lined with glass panels and a mural of Charleston's historic women leaders, Sloan sat at the head of the table. Her hair was pulled back in a low knot. A navy blazer rested over a simple blouse. She didn't speak often, but when she did, people leaned in. "I'm not interested in token partnerships," she said firmly, her fingers tracing the rim of a ceramic coffee cup. "If your outreach doesn't match your accounting, it's not a partnership. It's a PR stunt." The room nodded. Several members took notes. Gretchen sat 2 seats down, eyes calm behind her glasses. She didn't say a word, but her half-smile said everything. This was not a gamble that had paid off. This was the long game, executed perfectly. Near the back of the room, on a low bench, Marilyn sat with her hands folded in her lap. She wore cream linen, simple gold earrings, and the same faint perfume she'd always worn, orange blossom and clean resolve. She didn't speak, didn't need to. After the meeting, Gretchen approached her quietly. "She's settled in." Marilyn nodded once, her eyes never leaving the room Sloan had just stepped out of. "The handoff is complete," Gretchen added. Marilyn exhaled through her nose, the way people do when they're both proud and slightly amused. She never needed the trust, she said. Just the truth. Outside, the evening light slanted across the entry glass, scattering warmth across the tiled floor. A pair of teenage girls walked in, giggling over their volunteer badges, before falling silent as they approached the photo in the hall. "She really stood alone?" one asked. "She didn't flinch," said the other. In a small 1-bedroom apartment across town, Delia packed boxes in silence. The closet looked emptier than it should have. Her designer shoes had been listed on a local consignment site. A half-finished wine glass sat on the windowsill. The apartment smelled faintly of loss and lemon cleaner. Across the street, Avery sold his luxury car for a fraction of its value. The man handing over the keys didn't recognize his name. "I thought you were somebody," the buyer said casually. Avery's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. He didn't look back. He had nothing left to lean on now. No podium, no plaque, no legacy. The name still echoed in Charleston Hatcher, but not for them. They planned to inherit, waited for it, counted on it. But Marilyn hadn't spent her life building a legacy to let it rot in the mouths of the entitled. They were waiting for the handout. She was writing the conclusion. It was a warm, clean morning in Charleston, the kind of day where the air smelled faintly of pine and seawater, and the breeze moved like a whisper through open windows. Marilyn walked slowly through the house, her house, every step echoing, not with emptiness but clarity. Nothing needed removing, not a single thing. The china stayed. The books lined their shelves, spines cracked from use, not display. Family photographs rested exactly where they belonged. Those who mattered in silver frames, those who didn't, long since gone. She paused at the mantel in the sitting room. Her fingers traced the edge of the mahogany frame that held Sloan's letter from the scholarship girl's 3 teens with no pedigree, no politics, just gratitude scrawled in hopeful ink. She had once believed that kind of letter would come from Avery. It never had. Outside, tires crunched on gravel. She turned to the front window just as Sloan stepped out of her car, hair up, tote bag over her shoulder. She carried a small envelope in one hand. When the front door opened, Sloan didn't say anything at first. She simply held it out with 2 fingers and a small, nervous smile. "For you." Marilyn took it, the paper soft from having been folded and refolded. She opened it slowly. Inside was a check for $1,000 various to 19. Below it, a handwritten note. "First funds raised under my tenure. Local tutoring drive. We hit our goal in 4 days. It's not a lot, but it's real." Marilyn stared at the check, her vision blurred, but not from sentiment, not the Hallmark kind. This wasn't nostalgia. It was validation, proof that legacy wasn't blood. It was choice. Her fingers trembled slightly as she refolded the envelope. "You've done more with that 1,000 than your father ever did with 10 million, she said. Sloan looked down, her voice quiet. "I'm still learning." "You're already leading." Gretchen arrived an hour later with a cream folder labeled Final Filings, M. Hatcher Estate. She placed it on the kitchen counter with a satisfying thud. "It's done," she said. "No loose ends, no pending transfers, no access points. It's exactly how you wanted it." Marilyn poured her a glass of iced tea without speaking. They stood in quiet for a moment, like 2 women who had climbed a mountain and now understood how heavy the climb had truly been. Then Marilyn walked outside to the porch, tea in hand, a woven shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth. She sat in the rocker her late husband had once claimed, hands folded in her lap, face lifted to the wind. The neighborhood was still, not silent, but still birds in the trees, a lawnmower several houses down, the distant hum of life continuing, unaware of what had just been finalized. She watched the wind stir the gardenia bush by the porch steps. "She's just here to pose like a donor," she whispered aloud, her voice almost playful. Then, with a smile half victory, half elegish, added, "I posed, once, and pulled the world out from under them with a smile." The rocker creaked slowly behind her as she watched the sun climb, higher and higher, until it touched the very edges of everything she'd chosen to protect.